About our artist today. Our artist today is Milisa Galazzi. Did I say that correct?
You got it.
I know, I've been working on my Italian, haven't I, Tanya? Tanya's my witness. I don't roll my R still though, but that's the Irish version. Oh, there's my Italian traveling companion. How am I ours today, Miss Gentile? All right. Ms. Galazzi is best known for three-dimensional hand-sewn shadow drawings, her printed and drawn works on paper, and her richly layered abstract paintings, all of which explore the very nature of being human. Her work is held in private international collections as well as public collections in the United States, such as Women and Infants Hospital and the Women's Medicine Collaborative in Rhode Island. She exhibits nationally in solo and group shows in both galleries and museums. Galazzi's presents talks? Who wrote this?
Probably I did,
okay,
with my dyslexia.
Her present talks presents talks at national and international conferences, galleries, and museums.
I don't know my glasses.
Wait, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, use mine, sorry. I can't see without them. In any event. Okay. Galleries such as International Eucaustic Conference and the National Art Education Association Conference in New York City, and teaches classes at universities such as Clark and Yeshiva. Her artwork has been featured and reviewed in Surface Design, Fiber Arts, and Artscope magazines, as well as in books such as Contemporary Cape Cod Artist, On Abstraction, and Paper and Wax. Techniques in handmade paper and eucaustic, as well as eucaustic art in the 21st century. She attended and graduated from Phillips Academy in Andover. Her broad education directly informs the content of her art making. Galazzi works full-time in her studio in Providence, Rhode Island. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Milisa Galazzi.
Thanks. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today, and we're going to have some fun. I have a video to show you of me working in my studio, and I have some slides, and I'm really excited to answer a ton of questions at the end. So if you are, when you're watching this, notice what you're noticing and save your questions for the end. And the very first thing I want to do is tell you that my nickname is Misa, M-I-S-A, Misa. So I'm going to say good morning, Burlington High School, but I'm going to say good morning, BHS, and you guys are going to say good morning, Misa. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Good morning, BHS.
Good morning, Misa.
Awesome. And I asked you to do that because that helps me feel much more relaxed. Now, the very first thing, you guys have probably already decided in the first 15 seconds if I'm cool or if I'm dorky, because they have done research and human beings make that decision in the first 15 seconds. You know how dogs like smell each other's butts? Well, human beings just look at each other and say, she's cool, she's not cool. And my sons say, I'm both dorky and cool. First impressions last. And so raise your hand if anyone has ever taught you how to shake a hand. Okay, we've got a few people. All right, I'm going to give you the gift of teaching you how to shake a hand because first impressions last. So I need a volunteer to come up on the stage, and I won't embarrass you. What's your name?
Lewis.
Lewis, come on up here, right up here. Give Lewis a round of applause. Lewis, you taller than I am?
I don't know.
I'm only 5'2", so my guess is yes. Okay, your head's gonna, okay. So we'll stand like right here in the middle. Okay, so I'm gonna teach you guys how to shake a hand, all right? The first thing you do when you walk into a cocktail party or a dinner party or a job interview is you look straight at the person, square your shoulders, which we're doing, and you look them right in the eyes, and you're gonna lean forward with a step, and here's the trick. You have to lock your thumbs right in there like that. That's a good handshake. Ready? Hi, what's your name?
Lewis.
Hi, Lewis. I'm Misa. Awesome. Okay, one more time. Ready? Hi, I'm Misa.
Hi, Lewis.
Awesome. All right, now, thank you, Lewis. Good job. Okay, you guys are all going to stand up and do it. Ready? Everybody up. Turn to the person next to you, to your right. Introduce yourself with a name. Eye contact. And turn around now to the other person. Go ahead, shake hands. Lewis, shake his hand. Okay. And everybody sit down. Okay, who found that slightly awkward? Okay, one is showing up. You're not like, hi, hi, or wimpy handshake, like limp wrist handshake. You're showing up. This is what artists do. They show up. They take something from the inside and they put it out into the world. And whether you make poetry or write books or you play an instrument or you make visual art, you take something from the inside and you give it to the world as a gift. So the more you practice giving a handshake like that, and the more you practice taking your inside and putting it outside, the more successful you'll be. And that is the topic of my talk. And so what I'd like to do now is go into this. We're going to see a video for the first few minutes of me working in my studio. But before we do that, I have to take a selfie of us together. All right? You ready? Ready? It's for social media, so will you guys wave? 1, 2, 3. All right, awesome. Okay. Okay, are you ready for the... So I've always been a maker. I've always been an artist. And I've always been drawn to two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects. So I grew up knitting and crocheting and making all kinds of art with paper. And when I went to Brown as an undergrad, I majored in studio art, but I minored in cultural anthropology and women's studies. And so I'm really interested in the objects of people's lives, and I was particularly drawn to buttons and thread and sewing patterns and women's written correspondence, and a lot of those sort of detritus of women's work in domestic lives found its way into my artwork, particularly I think because I inherited my grandmother's button box, and I used to sit on the floor of her linen closet when I would visit her and go through her button box, and there was a lot of interesting things in there besides buttons. When I went to RISD, I started working more with those buttons and all those things. My work has moved from collage work to now more three-dimensional sculptural work with thread, paper, and the addition of wax, which I'm calling shadow drawings. I'm intrigued with the ways in which we interrelate, especially when these relationships are punctuated by physical distance or separation by time. So in this ongoing series of shadow drawings called String Theory, I visually nod to the visual complexities of interconnectedness, and I allude to the delicate and strong relationships which we form with one another over space and time. Working reductively to create dimensional lace with paper, thread, and wax, I literally and figuratively demonstrate that which is removed is as important as that which remains. So I've been pushing this series for about 10 years. I think it's really important to come into the studio sometimes and just play with materials. And so I picked up a piece of paper and I had my sewing machine set up and I just started sewing on this piece of paper. The way I make these string theory pieces, they start with very large sheets of Reeves BFK paper, and they begin as drawings, and the structure of the piece is built into the drawing. Once the drawing is complete, then I stand at my ironing board, actually, drape the paper over, and I pre-poke all of the holes. Then I erase all of the lines, and then I hand sew, and then after I've sewn it, I take an X-Acto knife and I cut along the line of the stitches, and so I'm cutting out all of the negative space. And then I have fabricated a really interesting way to dip large sheets of paper in beeswax with Damar resin. And so usually it takes 2 people, and we very gently dip the paper through a trough of 120-degree beeswax. And once the paper is saturated with the beeswax, it really transparentizes the paper so the light bounces off and within the paper in a different way than it does without the wax. Multiple light sources create almost a visual dance of light on the wall behind, and that's really what the pieces are about, are the shadows that the white stitching on the white paper create on the wall. String theory is giving visual reference to those human connections, and negative space being a metaphor for the human connections between people. For example, the relationship that you might have with a grandparent who's no longer alive, you still have memories and you still have a connection to them. Ultimately, I would love to see this series, this string theory series, made out of probably something more substantial than paper and thread and wax. And I can imagine it hanging on the outside of a skyscraper, 90 feet by 50 feet, and using the sun as the light source, moving around the building to create the shadows. So that's where I'm going to go. So as it's finishing up, how many of you guys have gone to the Cambridge Street Gallery and seen my work hanging there? Handful. Oh, great. It's going to be up until next Friday, November 15th. So it's right across from the cafeteria, so stop by and you can see these live. Don't touch them, but you can go and blow on them and they'll move a little bit. So now we're going to get into the slide part of my show, and I have to put my glasses on. So I want you to imagine a world, let's see if we can, imagine a world where 6 and 9 are the exact same number, B, D, Q, and P look exactly the same, saw and was is the same word, now and one, same word, and left and felt look exactly the same. And imagine when words blend together and flip and overlap and look like that. And also imagine that they also begin to lose all of their spaces, especially as you get more tired. Yeah, that's my world. That's the world that I was born into in 1965. This is actually my birth certificate. Those are actually my footprints. Those are the first marks I ever made in my life on a piece of paper. I was about a minute old. I was born with dyslexia. It took me 16 years to figure out that I was dyslexic. And I'm going to talk to you more about dyslexia and neurodiversity, and I'm going to talk to you about how that has influenced my artwork. So, you saw this picture of me in the video. 1971, I am 6 years old in this picture, and I do not know how to read, but I am an artist, and this is a painting that I made that won a state competition and hung in the Massachusetts state capitol in the governor's office. So I was an artist, but I was figuring out that I didn't know how to read, but I was creating really good workarounds. Like I was memorizing books. I was memorizing the pictures in the books and then memorizing the words. And that's basically how I read until 4th grade, when my 4th grade teacher looked at me and said, "You don't actually know how to read. There's no pictures in this book and you don't know what to do you?" And I was like, yeah, that's right. So between 4th and 5th grade, I actually learned how to read. It was painful. And middle school and early high school were really hard for me, though my art was getting better and better and better. So by 10th grade, and this is my second 10th grade, you heard that correctly, I did my first 10th grade, didn't do so well, but the art was really strong. This is a selfie before we had the term selfie, and I'm standing in front of my mirror in my bedroom holding a film camera, taking the picture, send the film out for 2 weeks, come back, you still don't know if you actually got the picture or not. This is my second 10th grade, where I still really wasn't doing very well in high school, and I went to the tutoring center, and a woman looked at me and said, "Has anyone ever told you you're dyslexic?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And she explained it to me, and I said, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." So I want to know, how many 10th graders are here now? You want to do it again next year? Yeah, no, it's no fun. 5 years of high school was a lot. So let me just talk to you a little bit about dyslexia. This is a hashtag, dyslexia is a gift, and I follow it. So the D, look at the I and the Y. I have a really hard time with vowels. They all sound the same to me. I can't tell the difference between D, I, as in the Y, or the I. And if you go over to the K, X, dyslexia, like I can't hear that difference. The S and the C, dyslexia, all very hard for me. So let's talk about what is dyslexia. So it's a neurological condition caused by a different wiring of the brain. Like my brain just works differently. And neurodiversity is a big tent word that explains that any difference in your brain or in your neurological wiring is just different. It's not bad, it's not worse or better, it's just different. And at the very bottom, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, Tourette's, all of these things sort of come under the big tent umbrella of neurodiversity. So for me as an artist, the list on the left are all the things that I find really helpful. So I can think big ideas, I can spot patterns really quickly, I have a really open way of problem solving and creative problem solving, and I think holistically and sort of around ideas as opposed to straight through them. And the list on the right is something that I found on Dyslexia as a Gift website, and basically it said the same thing. So those are my words and their words. When I did some research about famous dyslexics, the list on the left in the yellow lists Steve Jobs, Agatha Christie, John Lennon, Thomas Edison. I mean, these are all people you guys know, right? Ted Turner, Charles Schwab. I mean, these are Winston Churchill. But I realized there were a lot of men in this list. And so I wanted to come up with my own list, and so the list on the right is all the women. Does anyone know who Jessica Watson is? No? No one knows her? Okay, she's a 16-year-old girl who is the youngest person ever to sail solo all the way around the globe. Literally, sailed by herself at age 16 all the way around the world, couldn't read. Her mom had to read to her. She was dyslexic. So there's an example of somebody with incredible skills and gifts in one area and challenges in another area. So the more you start to look at this, you'll see that your superpower and your challenge very often are right next to each other. And that's what I found in my art making. So now I'm going to talk to you more about, and I'm going to go chronologically so that you can see how my art has kind of changed over time. In 1986, upper left for you, I was in college at Brown. I took a full semester paper making class, and the final exam was make 2 alphabet books where every page had to be a different alphabet letter. And I really loved it. And so I found that I was really drawn, pun intended, to letters and writing. In 1988, that was my senior year, I took a graphic design class at RISD and was assigned the letter Y and had to reproduce, I hand drew all of those Ys and then made a big installation of those letters and the book. In 1990, I thought I wanted to be a graphic designer, and I went to Brazzago, Switzerland one summer and studied graphic design, and Ferdinand Leger was the last name that I used to do this collage, and it starts to look like the floating letters of my dyslexia. And then by 1996, when I was back at RISD for grad school, which is where I met Christina Chang, I started to really use a lot of hand lettering. And then I found type. My mother-in-law gave me an old-fashioned typewriter, which I loved, and so I started typing on that, and by 2006 I was making these small collages and going to sales and selling them. And I probably made 400 or 500 of these little collages with type and hand sewing and letters. But I started to get a little bored of that. and really dug in with how can I change these little collages and make them more about memory. She Keeps Me Company was a memory of my grandmother, so I added tracing paper in 2006. And then in 2007, I found encaustic, which is hot beeswax. And I realized when I started to layer the beeswax and the paper by 2008, I had sort of the tools that I was going to keep working with for a while. When I got into my studio, I would always say, what if? What if I sew on the paper? What if I cut the paper? What if I dip the paper? And as I asked these questions and pinned them up on my idea wall in my studio, I started to notice the light coming in the window. And I realized that the shadows were more important to me than the actual paper. So by 2009, I was doing this. And what if, and this is an old barn in Martha's Vineyard, every summer I would go there for a week for an artist residency. What if I took these patterns for dressmaking? How many people work with patterns like this? Anybody seen these before? No? Okay, this is how we made clothes a long time ago. So I would dip these dress patterns in paper, in wax, and then I realized, wow, I'm really onto something now. So I had 3 solo shows in 1 year. Thread Text Time was one, Layers of Time, and Domesticity. And these 3 one-person shows featured these hand-dipped layered paper. So they were installations. Does anyone know what an installation is? Okay, I'll explain it. So in the upper left-hand corner is a painting that's about 24 by 24 inches. In an installation, you take some aspect of your two-dimensional work and you ramp it up to physical size. And so in the lower left, what I've done is basically created a scenario where people are walking through the layers of the painting. So I hung these dress patterns and you could walk through them, and everything on the wall was the directions for how to make these clothes. So 2010, I was really doing installation work, but I was also working with text still. And 2010 was when texting on these guys first came out. And so I created a text conversation, remembering a conversation that I had with my grandmother. She would call me on Sundays and say, "How are you doing, dear?" And I'd say, "Hi, Grammy." And she'd say, "Are you doing any handiwork?" And I would say, blah, blah, blah. So this was a text sewing installation on the wall. I also inherited about 5,000 100-year-old postcards from her, and I strung them all together and sewed them with buttons and hung them from the ceiling and kind of walking through postcards. I was also very interested in books, continuing my interest in bookmaking, and a book called None Dare Call It Treason was a book that was written in the 60s, I guess, and I found it in an old antique store. And I was invited to be in a book show where we were repurposing or remaking books. And so I wanted to think about the opposite of a book. So a book goes from front to back, or if you're reading a Haggadah, it goes from back to front, but it's linear, and the spine is on the outside. And so I wanted to make a book that was circular, with the spine on the inside, and instead of the pages flipping flat, I wanted them to stand on the edge. So I'm thinking about books and how can I make a non-book or an unbook, and so this was one of my pieces. I also created an installation at the International Encaustic Conference where I took the to-do list from the back of my sketchbooks and I made a shower curtain, and I installed all of this in the bathroom of this hotel that we were staying at, and I wallpapered the bathroom walls with all of my to-do lists, and I put an empty sketchbook, bottom left, you can see an empty sketchbook in the closet. And I wanted people to have the feeling of when I'm in the shower sometimes, and there's so much that I have to remember and think about coming into the day, and if only I had my sketchbook in the shower, I could remember to do all this stuff. So I wanted that sort of overwhelming feeling of like, I have so much to do and I can't write it down. And so that's another example of an installation where people could actually feel what I'm feeling. In 2012 is the first time that I hung my sewn paper with wax pieces together and really let the light shine on them. And that was the very first time that these shadow drawings became part of the wall or hanging. And there's I think there's 3 in the Cambridge Street Gallery that you can look at. So I started that series in 2009 and I'm still working on it. So 10 years and going. By 2017, I was starting to realize that these hand-sewn pieces didn't have a lot of my own hand or gesture in them. They were sort of like, let's see, well, I'm not gonna go back, well, maybe I can. Yeah, they're kind of pristine and clean and they almost look clinical or technical. So I wanted to get a little more messy. So I asked myself the question, well, what would it look like if I put my hand into my work? And I started drawing these gestures. And in 2017, the Asemic drawing series was born, and I'm still making those now. And that work is also in the gallery. Asemic means asemic. Semic means to have content, semic content. Asemic means no content. So it looks like handwriting without meaning. So I'm kind of flipping that on the head and saying, well, these drawings have feeling and meaning without the written word. So the last few slides I want to show you are the last things that I made in my studio. This is an Asemic book cover where I took out the book pages and I put in my own handwriting as the book. And here is a very large painting, 30 by 60, in 2 parts. It's called a diptych, and it's called Love Letters because my gallery sent out a prompt. My gallery is Miller White Fine Art Gallery on Cape Cod, and she put out a prompt to all the artists saying, read this love letter that Gustave Flaubert wrote to his wife, be inspired by it, and make your own work as a love letter. And then, after we did that, we had to write our own love letter. And so this is to my husband, with whom I have been together for 30 years and married for 27. And it does say, can you guys see where it says I love you? You see it? Yeah. It's in the white. It's like, I love you. And then I kind of wiped it out. So there's about 50 layers of writing in this thing, and some of the words are legible and some are not, but now that you see I love you, you can't unsee it. So it's always there. And my gift to you guys is that I really want you to think about, what makes you you, and be you, and honor all of the things that are your strengths and your challenges, because you have the power to own those gifts. And that's where your superpower lies, and that's where you're going to get true happiness, is not avoiding your challenges, but really celebrating them. I hope you stay in touch. These are all of my hashtags, and my Instagram is basically my major place. And I'm always looking for more followers, so I'm happy to have you follow me. And that is the end